see anything, can you?
Not really.
Cool, right. If you can all join me in welcoming Barnaby to the stage. I'll leave you to talk about single-page JavaScript apps.
Okay. Cool, yeah, so JavaScript, I'm sure you've probably all heard of it, something to do with the internet. I'm going to be running you through single-page applications, which are basically heavy users of JavaScript, how they're used on the web, single-page applications you might know. So why they're a thing at all, well, start with what they are, why they're a thing, and then go through with sort of a bit of a history, and then the current state of them. Things you might know, such as, well, we'll get to that. Anyway, this doesn't work. Turn it on. Oh yeah, there we go. Now we're talking. Okay, yeah, so my name is Barnaby Cotter, as you've probably been informed. I work at Parallax Digital Agency in Leeds. That's my Twitter handler, which I don't really use, as you can tell. So, what are they to start with? Yeah, no, they're not that. They're not that either. Like, that's a single-page website, big, long, scrolly jobby. You might have some cool scroll animations on it, stuff, parallax scrolling. It's not that. A single-page application is something entirely different. And the fact that it's an application is the key difference here. This refers to the fact that the browser is only going to refresh once. That means the little reload symbol, you see it at the top of your browser. You load the page, it just loads once. Something like Gmail, for example, is an example here. You load it up once, you never see that page load again. A normal website, every time you click a link, you change page, you see it change, the whole browser reloads, you get a fresh new page. Single-page applications work on an entirely different level. You load them up once, you load everything that you need to sort of load your further resources, and then everything from then is done via Ajax. Yeah, because if there was only one page, it would be naff. Well, that's just gone through like... Okay, so yeah. Why do they exist? Yeah, well, cast your mind back to a time far, far away. It's 1999. JavaScript is absolutely terrible. It doesn't really do anything apart from sweet-ass cursor trailers. But even then, even back in 1999, you had the foundation for really sweet interactive websites. In Internet Explorer, you had an ActiveX control, which could do Ajax, basically. Ajax, as a term, didn't even exist until 2005. But yeah, it was there, just no one used it because it was a bit of a horrible mess. And then around sort of 2002, Microsoft released kind of Outlook for the web, which was fairly terrible. But it took... This is going terrifically. It took one company in particular to turn that on its head, a certain megalomaniac company. You might have heard of them. They released a couple of apps called Gmail and Google Maps. You can probably guess who they are at this point. Google. And after that, they kind of released a whole bunch of these crazy big, scalable web applications, stuff like Google Maps. And people saw that and they're like, wait, we can actually build cool stuff on the internet. We can build giant, scrollable, clicky, interactive websites. And they're actually, they're not terrible to use. And at that point, people started being like, maybe I can do that. Maybe I can build the next Google Maps, the next Gmail. And God only knows how they built Google Maps, considering the sort of scale of JavaScript at that point. It's very impressive. People started thinking, hey, we can do this. We can make our own app. It's going to be cool. It's going to have sweet-ass cursor trailers. And then some people started to see all the common themes that arose out of this. People were like, hey, everyone seems to want kind of templating, or everyone wants animations, or everyone wants interaction, everyone wants to select parts of the DOM or control bits of their website. And a bunch of libraries cropped up, stuff like Prototype, Dojo, MooTools, EXTJS, and something you've probably all heard of, jQuery. Yeah, it feels like it's ever present, really. It's only the sort of developers who have been around for sort of longer than maybe 10 years or so who actually remember a time without jQuery. 2006, jQuery 1.0 came out. Yeah, exciting bit of trivia for you there. And yeah, with the release of these libraries, everyone was like, okay, with this JavaScript stuff, it's pretty easy. I'm going to make the biggest, craziest web application in the world. And then this happens. You've got a bunch of people working together on this JavaScript application. And, you know, it's pretty cool. It works. It works. You've been staying up late, working late, making this cool application. You take a few days off, and then you come back to it. And you look at it and you're like, what the hell have I done? What have I made? What have I created here? So a slightly bizarre picture of a spaghetti monster is how I imagine like weird code that you come back to and you're like, I did not write that. That was not me. And so, you know, time's moved on and frameworks as they are, or libraries progressed and became ever more complex as we started to realize that, you know, if businesses are going to start using JavaScript to run their applications and have these big interactive websites, then, you know, we're going to need multiple people working together. And, you know, they're going to need to understand what the other person's written more than like 20 minutes after they wrote it. You can't just open up one JavaScript file, like really informatively called main.js, and expect to understand what the hell is going on in it. So, you know, yep, go back again. You know, so yeah, you've got this big old main.js file, and you look at it, and what it is there is a big old tangled web of concerns. It is everything munged together into a big horrible beast, and that's not what you want, really. I mean, they ran into this problem in the 80s on the server side, where you've got all this code trying to do a bunch of different things, and you start to realize that one part of it is for displaying stuff to the user. Another part of it is for interacting with your data. And there's some bit in between which sort of controls talking to your data and talking to your view, or, you know, how you display your data, and which they decided to call a controller. This is MVC terminology, as most of you have probably heard the term bandied about. But yeah, some people thought, hey, this seems to have worked on the server side instead of big old JavaScript file. Can we apply those same principles on the browser, on the client side? And yes, of course we can. Key tenet, really, of MVC as a concept is this idea of convention over configuration. Is that, you know, instead of having 10 different JavaScript files that only you know what they do, is if you agree that every new project you start, you'll maybe have 3 files in this folder which have to do with how things look, 3 files in this folder which have to do with how you interact with your data, and some others somewhere else. You know, it all starts to make a lot of sense. You know, you put things where they belong. Controllers live in controllers. Yeah, so that is the basis of the MVC JavaScript front-end framework. Bit of a mouthful. But yeah, a few things have come into existence in the modern day, which you probably have heard of, or at least maybe some of you have used. Has anyone here used any of these 4 frameworks? Yeah, okay, some people, that's all right. You know, has anyone here used jQuery? Yeah, what's jQuery? Okay, yeah. So, you know, maybe some of these might be a bit nonsensical to you, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Something like Backbone, released in 2010. This, as I only found out when I was preparing this talk, is the same guy who wrote CoffeeScript and _.js, both very sort of big in the JS community libraries. And Backbone is a framework that is very unopinionated. Has anyone here used Airbnb? Massive, hugely scalable website, incredibly successful. And it uses a JavaScript framework that's only 850 lines long. Absolutely tiny. Like, you could read that in an evening, assuming you're a JavaScript developer, and, you know, it won't be very exciting, but you'll probably understand it by the end of it. I mean, and it really is just vanilla JavaScript. And you write vanilla JS, and you put it into these few sort of preset constructs, and at the end of it, you come out with some, you know, sort of some code that makes sense. Like, it's a kind of it's more of a guideline than it is a framework. It's like, put this here, put this here. You just write your normal JavaScript, but instead of in main.js, you put it where it makes sense. So yeah, it's very flexible, it's very extensible. There's a whole host of libraries out there that you can find for Backbone, which will do any number of useful or really not very useful things. A code slide, really? You're going to put that up there? No, but this is just to show you the idea of Backbone, how it works. Instead of having a bunch of different JavaScript handlers saying, click this, and then do this, and call this other library, the Backbone view basically says, all your events go in one place. This would be a big old list, probably, in an actual JS application. Everything that might happen in your view would happen here, and you say, and you make it very clear, this happens here. And you have all your different other things that might happen. You initialize your view, you render it. You know, I'm not going to go into detail on this because it's not very exciting. But you know, there is a use case for Backbone, and that is generally if you've not written anything with a JavaScript framework before, I would very highly recommend that you only do it on a small project. If you go in sort of all guns blazing, I'm going to build Gmail, I'm going to do it in Backbone, you're going to have a bad time. You know, really, you really are. So I would only recommend using Backbone if you're an experienced JS developer or it's a very simple project, because it's very lax in what it says you can and can't do, and that sort of gives people the freedom to do it really, really wrong. I only know that because I've done it. So next framework we'll maybe look at that you might have heard of. Has anyone here heard of Angular? Yeah. It's taking its time getting going, but businesses are starting to take note. You're starting to see some really big web apps built in Angular. It's pretty huge. It's probably the biggest JavaScript framework at the moment. And yet, developed by Google, so it's got some industry support. And this is what I've called here a monolithic framework, and that is that it tries to do everything. It says, we'll do your routing, we'll do your templating, we'll do your data binding. You know, it's kind of a jack of all trades, or at least that's how they released it at the start. Sorry, I'm just going to have a sip of water. But yeah, it's got this key idea of declarative code for the UI, which sort of makes sense. I did have a demo here, but if you're interested at all, you can check out the slides later and open up this JS fiddle, which I'm sure all of you will be doing later. Basically, the idea is that you declare in your HTML what it is your application does and what's going to happen when you click something. Because we've all been there, or at least any developers here have been there, where you open up a HTML file and you open up the JavaScript alongside it, and you're like, clicking this does what? Like, this is bound to do this, and and you end up in this horrible mess. But the idea is that you put on your HTML as attributes, I click this, and this happens. Or this is only going to show if this is true. And it sounds weird to have all this stuff in your HTML, but it's actually really, really nice, and it makes a whole lot of sense. I would recommend it. Definitely check out that fiddle. Okay, I'm definitely going to figure out how to use this thing at some point. Probably about the end of my prototype. Just said the word prototype because I saw it at the end of my presentation. Yeah, okay. So yeah, when would you use Angular? Angular, I would recommend using if you need to rapidly prototype something. As the aforementioned fiddle would show you, it really is excellent for prototyping. You can create complex, like crazy UIs, or like compartmentalized into components which interact with each other. Really nice, sort of slick feel to them. It's also good in large development teams, mainly because of the convention aspect that I mentioned to you earlier. Everything in its right place, as Radiohead would say. This idea of things of one type live in one folder and other things live elsewhere. It means that someone else can pick up your code and be like, what the hell is the HTML for this going to be? And they're like, oh, it's there, where it should be. And that makes a lot of sense to someone coming in with no idea what they're doing. However, advice to anyone considering picking up Angular is it is deceptive. You pick it up and you try and you make your baby's first web application, and you're like, this is sweet, I can do this. And then it gets horrendously difficult once you start trying to do things like directives, and then you're like, wow, this is actually really horrible. But then you realize it's not that horrible at all, and everything's fine. And then you've actually made a pretty cool web app by the end of it. So yeah, pick it up, but don't be disheartened when you're suddenly like, what? I don't understand. This isn't as easy as it appeared. Okay, Ember. I've not really used it. As far as I can tell, it's very similar to Angular. Has anyone here used Ember? Yes, this guy. Okay. I'll be brief here then. It's very similar to Angular. Another monolithic framework does everything for you. You want to build a big, complex Gmail, the next Google Maps, Ember, you can probably do it in that. I'd be very impressed if you did. Yeah, it's basically Angular, but slightly reskinned. Has anyone heard of React? Yeah? Okay, fairly fresh from Facebook and Instagram. They've worked together on creating this kind of a UI-based JavaScript framework for building, or you can use it for building anything really. They've used it for building Facebook and Instagram, so I guess you could say it's got some credentials. It's, yeah, you know, we've probably heard of them. But it's the idea that you can quickly prototype these little self-contained widgets, like you might have, say, your friends list on Facebook on the right, or events, or something like that. Each one of those will be its own self-contained bit of JavaScript that kind of maps out exactly what that little thing's meant to do, how it does it, and, well, Facebook are mental. They keep all their CSS in JavaScript as well. They're absolutely batshit. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend that. It does all this crazy stuff, which, if you're interested in sort of the cutting edge of web tech at the moment and how the big boys are doing it, then you can look into this. I've only had a brief play with it myself. It seems quite confusing, but also kind of awesome. I'd recommend it. You write your components in this crazy language, which is a mishmash of JavaScript and HTML, which is entirely bonkers. But yeah, it's pretty cool. Check it out if you're in any way interested in that sort of thing. Common themes, really, between all of these frameworks. I mean, what's going on across the whole sort of web development thing, like what are front-end frameworks doing at the moment? They are all moving towards this idea of component-based architecture. Things like I mentioned, like the friends list on the side, or like my recent events that I've been to. That will just be in their HTML as something called like my recent events. It won't be some horrible series of divs and with classes and IDs, 2 IDs that are the same. There'll be none of that. It's just be that in the HTML. And it's just this self-contained little unit, and the idea of building up complex web applications out of these little jigsaw pieces. And sort of really, that's the way it's going. You might have heard of web components as one of the kind of like parts of the future of web, or whatever bullshit you want to call it. But yeah, there's a oh yeah, we'll get to that. That's a sweet gift coming your way. Yeah, so that's the future. You've got component-based architecture. Angular 2 doesn't even have controllers. It might feel like a step backwards to some. But the idea is that everything's being broken down into these little constituent parts, even the frameworks, and you can just include the bits you want, the bits you don't want, you know, and really they're all kind of converging on this one ideal of sort of the modern web and these little like bits that you just kind of insert and they just do what you want. Like, kind of like using your phone now. You open an app and it just does exactly what you expect. The idea is that when building a website, you just include these little sort of HTML tags, and they do everything that you expect them to do, and it's all contained inside this web component. But yeah, that's the kind of sort of core ideal of the Web 3.0. Yeah, so choosing a JavaScript framework at the moment, it doesn't really matter. I mean, like, yeah, it moves, yeah. Yeah, I'm going to go past that. Oh, yeah, what I'm going to do is close the application somehow using the clicker. Anyway, how it ends is basically, it doesn't matter which web app you use, they're all the same. Like, they all have this kind of key understanding that, you know, yeah, they're all good. They all sort of encourage you to do the same thing, of separate your code out into nice little chunks and make them do what they're supposed to do. You know, if you can build a nice, clean web application, then I can come down, I can sit and I can work on it, and I can help you build that. We can work together in harmony, yeah. I work in technology, apparently. So yeah, that's basically the sort of whistle-stop tour of single-page applications. Thank you.